I was last summer in Berlin, and they have like 10 different types of milk. In Cuba, if you are lucky, they have cow milk, and that's it. They even got married. She took him to the US, but he seemed to be like the perfect man. And then when he was in the US, he would treat her like a princess, do everything for her, and la la la. And then after some weeks or months, he would just say ciao. It was obvious that he only was with her for the papers.
What I found was really, really sweet was that when I was staying in a hotel, he didn't have a phone, right? And so in order for us to meet, he would call the hotel over and over and over again until I was in the room. And that was the only way that we could actually arrange meeting. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dating Beyond Borders podcast. Today, I've got Alissa, a German creator who made the move to Cuba back in 2018. Definitely not a place most people think of when they're relocating. And we're going to chat about what it's like living in a country where even basic things can be hard to come by, what makes it all worth it, how to spot a jinetero, and what you need to know about dating in Cuba as a foreigner. So welcome, Alissa. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Nice to be here. I'm very happy.
So, Alissa, let's get right into it. I'm really, really curious about your reason for settling down in Cuba. And the reason I ask this is, of course, because you come from Germany and, you have a life in Germany that is so comfortable, so easy in a way, and to switch it all up for a country that is so much more difficult to live in. There must be a good reason. But tell me the whole story, how you came to Cuba and, what influenced that decision to settle in Cuba.
Wow. So how much time do you have? I don't know. Okay, where do I start? I mean, I was in a holiday in vacations in Cuba back in 2016, 17. And somehow I liked it. Although looking backwards from now, I don't know. I mean, I just went to the most touristy places. I haven't even been to the real Havana, real Cuba, where I'm currently living. But somehow I like the atmosphere. I'm a vintage fan, so I love everything vintage. But I like the positive vibe, the energy. Everybody was always happy, smiling. Of course, the lack of so many basic things. But also, they seemed to be happy and they didn't care. And then I went back to Cuba in 2018 to finish my master's. I studied art history and to do research for a PhD about fashion history in Cuba. And my plan wasn't to stay there for a long time or forever or anything. Actually, I was pretty scared to go to live to Cuba because it's a half year before I went to Cuba. I had sleepless nights and I was thinking, so what you doing? Do you know where you go to? You go to a country where there's no internet. Back then there was no internet, where there's nothing. What the hell are you thinking? And well, then somehow I did it because I didn't want to regret to not have done it. And I was so happy. I mean, of course it was a challenge like everything. I remember when I got there, I was my landlord, he was Swiss, so luckily, so we spoke German. And I remember when he said, and if you want to buy drinking water, just let me know. I can show you because it's far away. And I was like, huh? Why isn't drinking water available at any kind of store around the corner? So, and the first months they were quite hard because I didn't speak any Spanish and just to settle in this new culture. But I know somehow I liked it there. I liked my life there. I liked it that I felt more alive, strangely. And this is also what I hear a lot from my customers now. They say they know all the differences, the troubles, but they say somehow in Cuba they feel more alive. I don't know, maybe because we have more real life problems, real problems, where do I get food from or where do you get this or that?
I think you bring up a really, really good point, and that's comfort is really good, but too much comfort seems to have people kind of maybe way too comfortable and not really feeling alive. And I think you get this issue with a lot of Northern European countries where people complain a lot. They'll complain about every little thing. And we say first world problems, but literally they are first world problems. People don't appreciate it because it's just too easy. If you want to eat, you order Uber Eats. If you want to drink water, you open the tap water and the water is perfectly safe to drink in Germany, right? And all these things, like, I mean, it's so easy that I think that feeling of aliveness is missing in many people's lives. They don't appreciate it as much. So was that kind of your feeling that you were like, I'm living in Germany, it's a great country. And then I think you moved to France as well. So you were already in that traveler's mindset, right? But were you feeling like I'm missing a little bit of that spice, that passion, that feeling of like, ooh, I am alive?
Yeah. And also I had the feeling like where I live, like in Germany, everything was already there or like invented or like created. Whereas in Havana, it was, especially around that time, I came to Cuba shortly after Obama went there. And there was like a boom in the society. There were new restaurants, there were new shops, everybody was happy. The market was uprising. It was a very, very euphoric time. And then one day when you woke up and you said, I don't know, I want to be a singer, for example, then you just went for it. You just did it. So, or like, I want to create like, I don't know, social media agency, or I want to do this, I want to do that. People just did it. Maybe it's also like an American thing, because American continent thing, I don't know. But yeah. I miss that spirit somehow in Germany.
Yeah, that's a great point as well. I've had a few German creators on the show, and this point always comes up, and not just German, French as well. And they always talk about the fact that if you want to, start something, people are always kind of critical and negative about it. Like the question is not why not. The question is why. Why do you want to do that?
Exactly.
And then, do you have all the skills to do that? And why would you switch your job for this? So the entrepreneurial spirit is there, but it's not as strong as in North America for sure. And so how did this affect the people? Like you mentioned that in Germany, everything is so comfortable, so easy. What difference did you see between the people, living in Germany and living in Cuba?
I think Cubans appreciate the small things like more than anybody else. I think that's the big difference. Yeah. Like they're just happy. They're happy with like small things. Yeah. It's amazing. I worked for a travel agency. My boss, he always said, yeah, a Cuban can be happy. Like for a Cuban, a birthday party, it's enough if you bring like a cake and a bottle of rum. Like, and then a Cuban can make out a party of like just the two things, whereas in other countries, you need this, you need this, and then you're happy because it's not the right cake and this and that and la la la.
Yeah, I remember when I was in Cuba, I talked to a few Cubans and they said like years ago, you didn't even have dates in a restaurant or even in a cafe. A date would be going to the malecon and having ice cream with someone. That was a date, and it was enough. Yeah,
sure.
I think it's definitely true. I think like appreciating small things. I feel like it is interesting though that, I mean, you mentioned that Cubans didn't have internet when you came in 2018. So what did that look like?
I mean, there was no internet like on the phone, like with mobile data. You could have Wi-Fi signal, but only at hotel lobbies or at some internet parks, like within the city. And that was a trouble, because you had to queue up in front of a kiosk to buy like this internet code, this card, and then you could connect. But then sometimes they run out of cards, or the amount of cards per person are limited. And then when it was raining, you could not go to connect because it would be totally wet and this and this and that. It was like our problem to connect. And I remember like I remember my second week in Cuba, my phone got stolen. And I was like off communication, like also within Cuba, like to call my friends and so. And then luckily I had a tablet. And with that tablet, I connected in the park into my family. It was only possible like one time a day. And if they were not connected at that time, okay, then it happened the other day. This is crazy. It was like back in the, I don't know, in the 90s, like when you only had landline phones, and then you called somebody when he was home. You were lucky. If not, then yeah, another day.
Yeah, I remember buying those cards and then you have to scratch them off. And one time I scratched too hard and I had to get another card.
This happened to me as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like nowadays we idealize the time where there's no internet. Like, oh, life would be so much easier if we didn't use our phone 24/7. I agree with it, but it's so hard to go backwards though. Like, especially if your business is online, how do you do that? So I remember how difficult it was for me when I was in Cuba for 2 weeks. Obviously as a content creator, to not have internet, to have to go to the park. This was a few years back. I cannot imagine what it's like living like this, not having internet. How did you survive this?
I have no idea. But also back then, I wasn't into the Instagram thing. So it was not that important for me. I wasn't a creator back then. And then internet came to the phones. And I remember that December 2018 was a milestone. And since then, we have internet on the phone. Like internet sometimes can just be like slowly, like more slowly than in other countries. Also many, especially as a creators, there are things that are annoying because there are some functions on Instagram you cannot use, or a lot of, for example, the monetizing, everything with monetizing or Facebook ads, Meta is not possible in Cuba, or like my Facebook now is blocked for that for a lifetime and a lot of trouble, which is bad. Like if you have business and want to make ads, you cannot do it in Cuba. You are blocked for a lifetime to do it and those kind of things.
Yeah, and now you're able to use internet on your phones. You're able to use the internet on your computer at home, right? Yeah. But as you've mentioned in one of your videos that I saw on your Instagram, that you're starting a business and you have all these restrictions when it comes to selling on I think it was Etsy you mentioned.
Etsy, yeah.
And so you have the restrictions, but you can't even, let's say if you go back to Germany, you also can't, like, you can't just, it's really hard to make it work.
Yeah, exactly. You have to leave the country in order like to make some things work, but then you are not in Cuba, so you cannot work because you need to be in Cuba with the internet. So 2 things in one place. And this is really annoying and frustrating.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other restrictions that you have when you're in Cuba when it comes to food. I'm very, very curious about this. I've definitely heard stories. I was on a flight in Spain and I met a Cuban flight attendant. And she was talking to me about the restrictions that you have when it comes to, buying eggs, buying chicken, this kind of stuff. And we've talked briefly about it. I would love to really hear the full story of how your day is when it comes to buying food.
So talking about Cuba, I have to make every time a cut like before the pandemic and after the pandemic, because it's like now 2 different lives. Or actually, it's better to say before the changing of the money system and after, which happened at the same time as the pandemic. So before 2020-21, I could buy eggs everywhere, like in governmental shops, and no problem, and they were cheap. And then food got shortened because of the economical problems. There was no tourism, so there was no money in Cuba. So Cuba couldn't buy food on the world market, because you have to know, I think more than 80% of the food of Cuba is imported. So, and then eggs from that on were like not available. Like there were times there were like many eggs available, and then there were times there were like no eggs available. So they were not constantly there. And this happened with a lot of food. Now it's better, but prices are like really high.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And is there food that's just never available that you're unable to buy?
Food that is not available. Oh God, so many. A lot. It's better if you ask me what is available, and then everything else is not available.
So let's rephrase
just make
that.
an example.
What is available? What can you be guaranteed to buy?
First of all, there's no guarantee at all in Cuba for nothing. Yeah, maybe for rum. Yeah, rum, yes, but the rest really, you can go to a store and one day it's full of like, let's say, toilet paper. This is always my standard, the toilet paper. And then the other day, it can be completely out of toilet paper. Nobody knows if it comes back, when it comes back. So, for example, let's say toilet paper. I go to a shop in Germany. I have like so many different brands. I have different flavors of toilet paper. I have a lot of choice. In Cuba, there's just one type to buy. And that's it. If there's toilet paper, there's just one type. You buy it or not. Or let's say milk. For example, so many people now, every coffee shop in Berlin, for example, I was last summer in Berlin, and they have like 10 different types of milk. In Cuba, if you are lucky, they have cow milk. And that's it. They don't have oat milk. They don't have any kind of these, let's say, luxury things.
Yeah, if you're lactose intolerant, you're screwed.
Yeah. Also, if you're a vegetarian or vegan, you are screwed.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second to thank you all for tuning into this podcast. These podcasts take so much work. So any of your support is much appreciated. If you have a second, please go and give it a follow and a 5 stars if you really enjoyed it. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, it's so interesting that when I was in Cuba, and I went to some friends' houses and they were Cuban, and I noticed how, the things that we throw out, like Disney posters and like these old things they would use to decorate their walls, and like everything was useful, that was interesting to me. And this was like, I think only a few years back, YouTube was already in full bloom. And I remember they were showing us funniest home videos or, those kind of shows. And a friend of mine and I went like, imagine they saw YouTube. Like they had no idea that YouTube was a thing. And this was, I want to say maybe 6-7 years ago. Probably now, obviously with with internet coming to Cuba, things have changed, but, this was still pretty recent. And that was so interesting to me how we're always discarding things and we're buying new things here in North America, especially. I think maybe less in Germany, right? But in Cuba, like everything is valuable because there's, same in comparison to Cuba, we're the same. But in Cuba, everything is so valuable because there's so little of it, right? And is that still the case? Do you notice this with going to people's houses? Just how like they'll reuse things many times? Yeah.
Yeah, like empty yogurt box. Like this small plastic box where yogurt is inside, I would throw it away. And Cubans say, no, don't throw it away. I remember my colleagues back at work, they were collecting everything. So I was there, ate my yogurt, I threw it away. And then the cleaning lady, she came saying, no, don't throw it away. We can use it. I was like, for what? I don't know, but maybe we can use it. And under the sink, she had 2 boxes full of empty plastic boxes, yogurt boxes, like whatever kind of containers. And always I said, you already have so much here and you never use it. So why? No, maybe one day we can use it and la la la. And it's kind of funny, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I started to be like that as well, because it's true. Sometimes when you need something, you're screwed in Cuba. You cannot just go like to a shop and buy like a lunchbox or so. People would use their, the Philadelphia containers, where the cheeses, and they would use it to carry the lunch to work.
Yeah.
In Cuba. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. If you can go to the store and get boxes meant for this specific thing that you're doing, then you have to make do with whatever you have, right? So was that the hardest thing in getting used to the life in Cuba for you?
Yeah, I think so. Like to learn that there's not everything always available. There's also, of course, some cultural differences. So always when I'm in Cuba, they also realize that I don't need so many things of which I think I would need them. So, for example, I can live perfectly without going to like, I don't know, those shops, Zara, H&M, everything for like, I don't know, for the time I'm in Cuba. Sometimes I'm there for nine months without leaving. And okay, so maybe at the end of the 9 months, I'm like, okay, now I could go shopping. But it's true, if you don't have the possibilities, if you don't see them, you don't need it. But also, I also want to add that I can say this because I have the luxury that I come from Germany. I have a passport. I can travel. I would never ever say this to a Cuban because I also know how shitty it is when you need something and you cannot buy it and you will never have the possibility to buy it. And sometimes people say this to Cubans, so, oh, you're so lucky because yeah, in my world, everything is full of commercials and it's so quiet there. And yeah, okay, you can say this because you come from a higher standpoint. But I feel like it's unfair to say it to Cubans because they have no choice. So I know that people don't say it with the purpose to hurt Cubans. It's just like they don't think about how it is like to be in the other person's shoes. So.
Yeah. And I think it's part of the way to make them feel better about their situation. Like, oh, well, our life isn't so great. But of course, you can always get away from the commercials. And, let's say if I live in Germany, I can always live in a village somewhere, but I still have access to all these things that Cubans don't have, right? So
exactly,
you have way more options, especially if you live in Europe. You can literally live in the south of Spain and still have access to that. And then do you feel that kind of lack in people as well? Like, is it true that Cubans are just so happy and they're so in the moment? Or do you feel like people are just like, no, I'm not happy. Get me out of here. And maybe we're talking more about the younger generation here.
Yeah, they're definitely not happy and everybody wants to get out. Yeah, true. Because they're also sick and tired of like everything is so hard like to get and they see, of course, like they have TV, they have internet, they talk to travelers, they know how it can be.
Well,
and yeah, they're definitely not happy. Yeah.
Let's talk about cultural differences when it comes to Cubans. What have you noticed through your experience?
So one of the biggest differences was like, doesn't matter if it was a friend or a boyfriend. Let's say you make an appointment. Let's say we meet tomorrow at 3:00 in, I don't know, in the cafe. Then for me, as a German person, okay, this is settled. For Cuban, that doesn't mean anything at all. So always the next day, I think it's so funny. Then they would call you sometime before to like reconfirm. And at the beginning, I was always like, I didn't reconfirm. Did I miss something? Wasn't it sure? But no, you have always to reconfirm. If not, nothing is settled at all.
That's so funny. I feel like that's such a Latin American thing in general, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like Cubans call more than Germans call? Do you feel like Germans text more than Cubans?
Definitely. Yeah. I think in Germany, nobody calls anybody anymore. Only if I get a call in Germany, I'm like, oh my God, something happened. Emergency. Because I'm not used to it. In Cuba, it's like normal because WhatsApp came quite late to Cuba. So, and also they like to talk a lot. So it's like you see this typical image of the Latina mom in front of the TV and talking on the telephone with her friend and that's definitely true.
Is socialization still such a huge part of the culture as it was a few years ago when I was there?
Yeah, there has nothing changed. Yeah. I always say in Cuba, you don't need like Tinder or any Bumble or any kind of dating app. The dating app is the street or the club or like literally everywhere you go.
Do you get approached a lot by Cuban guys?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Most of the time, you just walk the street and like every man, doesn't matter if young or old or anything, would just say, oh, you're beautiful. So that's like the standard. Okay, they do it more on tourists or like foreigners than on Cubans, but also Cuban women get to hear that a lot. Oh, you're beautiful and la la la. And I think it's very funny. It's like the different directions, like when men approach foreigners in Cuba and Latinas, because it's completely different. So the foreign women, they are like, oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, that's so nice. Blah, blah, blah. They feel like so flattered because mostly they come from countries where this is not a thing anymore, that you a man gives you a compliment on the street also. So they feel like really flattered. And Cubans are more like, yeah, thank you. I know that I'm beautiful. Tell me something else. Very Latina.
That's true. They're used to it, right? It's funny for you probably when you go back to Europe, especially when you go back to Germany, and you notice how this never happens in Germany. You would never walk down the street, and unless the man is maybe from like North Africa or, the Middle East.
That's true. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They do. Yeah. That's true. That's true.
I think
also,
you would be...
when I'm in Cuba, I also have to adapt to that again, because in Germany, I can be like invisible on the street. I can just walk to the grocery store. Whereas in Cuba, it's like a catwalk because they're always watched by everybody.
Now, how do you know if the man that is approaching you is genuinely interested in getting to know you? And how do you know if he is after you because you're a foreigner?
So when he hits on you on the street, he's, let's say, 99.9% of after you because you're a foreigner.
And what are these guys called? Let's talk about them.
Yeah. It's called jinetero, and that the translation is jinetero is like a professional horse rider.
Interesting.
Well, maybe it has some sexual connotation. I don't know why they call them jineteros, but that's it.
And what does that actually mean when it comes to, dating?
A jinetero in general is a Cuban who is he only likes to date or only dates foreign women because he wants to get a benefit out of it. It can start like from a free night at the club, because then the lady should pay for anything, up till she marries him, and then he gets the possibility to leave Cuba. And I just have to say, it's both ways. So also there are jineteras, like the female version of it. Exactly the same.
And have you had any experience with jineteros?
Well, in the sense that they try to hit on me, yeah, definitely, all the time. But I was never with a jinetero boyfriend, because for me, I'm not a tourist in Cuba, so I don't leave Cuba. I live in Cuba, so, and they always approach the foreigners in order to get out of Cuba, but that wouldn't happen with me. So.
So they're interested in you because, let's say, you're a German and you're like, I'm sorry, man, but you don't get any of the benefits of dating me. We're stuck in this together, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you had any foreign girlfriends, or has anyone had that experience of dating someone and they were being used for money?
Yeah. Actually, yeah, like, let's say almost everybody, like, if you're a tourist, then yeah, like almost 100%. And also I had the case, one of my ex-clients, actually quite tragic. They even got married. She took him to the US, but he seemed to be like the perfect man. And then when he was in the US, he would treat her like a princess, do everything for her, and la la la. And then after some weeks or months, he would just say, ciao, I go, and leave her. So it was obvious that he only was with her for the papers. So, yeah.
And it makes sense in a way. Like, I find it hard to judge jineteros or jineteras sometimes, because I feel like when you're stuck in a country, doesn't allow any room for growth or any real growth in any sense. Your only escape is tourists, right? Like, I mean, I think it's hard to speak from the outsider's point of view when you've been raised with a good passport. But if I were raised in Cuba, I'm not sure that I would be jinetera. But I from what I've heard in a lot of these kind of relationships, it's not even that they're, making it always very obvious, but they would say things like, if a woman is dating a man, she would say like, oh, my mom is sick, or we need a new roof. And she would like pull a little bit of the money to support her family through that, and vice versa, obviously. And yeah, for me, like, of course, it's not a positive, right? But it's so hard to judge that. Do you agree with that, or what do you think about it?
I don't know. I completely understand. They somehow they don't have other possibilities, or like this is like the easiest, but also almost the only option. But then at the other side, I judge a lot that, I mean, they always get somebody hurt, like emotionally, and also they lose a lot of money to foreigners. And I don't want to justify like this. Yeah. So I don't know.
I think though, like as a, let's say 50-year-old woman that comes to Cuba and has an 18-year-old Havana boy fall in love with her magically, you have to use some sense. I watched a few documentaries about this, and I always wonder how these women get so fooled into it, right? Of course, if you're about the same age and there's actually like a great moment they're experiencing together, there's a possibility this person's genuinely interested in you. But if with this big age gap, I always wonder, really.
Me too. And also it's the same with men. Also in Cuba, also I know a lot of men, of course, to whom that happened, and also some of them are quite clear. I think more men than women are clear about that. The young, for example, men know that the young women are not interested in him because he's so hot or like handsome or whatever. They know that the Cuban women are looking for a provider. So I think men are more clear about that than women. Yeah. Also, a lot of men. I know a guy. He is married to a Cuban woman, and then she took everything. He bought a house, a car, of course, everything in the name of her, because as a foreigners, you cannot have possessions. Now it's changing in Cuba, and also in the progress of like getting the residency. But until now, that everything has to be in the name of the Cuban, and then she took everything away from him, cheated on him, the whole package. And then after like 3 months, 4 months or so, they got back together. And I'm also like, sorry, Jude, but seems like you were looking for that.
Yeah. I always think that, and you've touched upon this, but the people that come to Cuba, and I think this goes a little bit more for women. No, maybe I think it might go for both. But I think that they're missing something in their countries, that they come to Cuba and they want to feel that passion and that excitement in Cuba, right? And I think that makes them an easier prey for these kind of scams because they're so desperate to feel these emotions that it's so much easier to play with them, right?
Yeah, also, yeah, because most women say what they lack back in their home country, they don't feel feminine. It starts with, okay, when you're from a cold country, you cannot wear like, skirts or tops or anything like that. And then almost all these women come to dance salsa, and it's a very sensual dance, and they feel like sexy. And also then the man giving them compliments, which wouldn't happen back in their country. I think it's the femininity thing. Like, yeah, they say they feel like more feminine in Cuba, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. And have you had a positive experience with dating in Cuba? Tell me about that.
Well, I'm single at the moment, so no. Like, at least I wasn't dating jineteros, but there were other things why the relationships didn't work out. Most of the time, it was really like the cultural differences, the small things.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, like, I can take my passport and I can travel everywhere I want to go. Whereas my Cuban boyfriend, he couldn't do that. And it's like just an inequality, and nobody can actually solve that problem. And
yeah.
It's hard.
And I don't often share my personal experiences, but I do quickly want to tell you my experiences in dating a Cuban. dating for a week. But when I was in Cuba, I went to one of those, I guess, international nights. But the guy that I met, he didn't know how to dance salsa. He wasn't like a smooth talker. He didn't know any of this stuff. But it was such an interesting week, and he was such a genuine person. And again, I agree, it's so hard to find. I think he just didn't fit into that stereotype of that like smooth talker Juan kind of Latin lover. That's why he was like, I guess not your typical case. But he what I found was really, really sweet was that when I was staying in a hotel, he didn't have a phone, right? And so in order for us to meet, he would call the hotel over and over and over again until I was in the room. And that was the only way that we could actually arrange meeting. And he came to the date with a flower, I remember. And when I left, he gave me like a homemade mixtape or a homemade CD I think it was. And it was just the sweetest thing ever. Because you just don't see this kind of stuff in general. Like when has anyone ever made you a mix CD? Like, Spotify list maybe at its best.
Yeah.
And we stayed in touch for a very long time, but it was incredibly difficult. And I didn't have any plans to bring him to Canada. Like that was not worth it for me. But now he lives in Germany. So he did meet a girl. And in the end, he told me that he didn't want someone to help him leave Cuba. He wanted to do it on his own. But of course, he was incredibly frustrated. He was an artist. And he said that in Cuba, it was really, really difficult for him because people didn't understand it because he was an abstract artist. And he was just really frustrated with his life, But and I just remember even like, coming over to his house, even the mattress he was sleeping on was really bad quality, and he was always complaining about back pain. And I really felt bad for the guy. But the point is, he never asked me for anything. He never asked me for money. He never asked me to sponsor him or even hinted towards it. But at the end of the day, now he lives in Hamburg with his I think German wife. Yeah. So in the end, the story is kind of yours, but in the opposite direction.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, there are also those kind of men, we don't want to generalize, but we are talking about jinetero, so
Yes. There are good guys there, of course, in Cuba.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to say that, everyone's like this, but of course, jinetero is a really, really strong case, so much so that there's a word created for it, right? So we know it's a thing. And especially, I think, guys that work in tourism, right? The guys that work in all-inclusives, animators, they're the ones that are especially known for that. Or girls as well.
Yeah, not only. Yeah, but also, like, they can be like anywhere, like in a salsa dance club, salsa teachers. Oh my God, that's my stereotype, the salsa teacher. I know so many girls who ended up marrying a salsa teacher. That's like, that's like one of the first contact person a tourist girl has is the salsa teacher.
Yeah. And then was it successful, this marriage with a salsa teacher? Like, is it a genuine relationship?
Yeah, I know like 3 or 4 girls. They now live in Germany or Netherlands or somewhere else. Until now, it was successful.
Let's talk about dates. You've been on dates in Cuba. How are those dates different to the dates in Germany or France or anywhere else?
I didn't find them so different, like you would meet in a cafe or in a restaurant or in a club, salsa place, whatever. You cannot go to the cinema because cinemas are never working and blah, blah, blah. But the problem more about dates is like the money issue, because of course all men are gentlemen and they want to invite you, and it always depends on, there are also Cubans who have the money. So not everybody is poor in Cuba. There are a lot of people that really have money. They have more money than we have. But like for like, let's say the normal Cuban ones, like he can invite you like once or twice and then not anymore. And that's it. I remember there was a guy once, he wanted to date me and he wanted me to come to his home, this apartment. And I was like, no. I don't go to your home like on the first day. I want to meet in a neutral place, like in a cafe restaurant. And he was always like, no, and like insisting on going home. I was like, no, why do you want to do that? And then at the end, it came out that he said, I'm sorry, but I cannot afford to go to a restaurant. I'm very sorry. And I was like, oh, yeah, shit, I didn't think about that.
Yeah,
That
is sad. It's sad because you want to be a gentleman, and I think the culture encourages being a gentleman. It's not like Germany where you can go 50-50 and that's totally fine. But I think Cuban culture is all about being a man, taking care of the woman. But if you can't do that, that kind of makes you feel that's frustrating. I can imagine.
Yeah, that's true.
First dates. Yeah, it's interesting. And then were there any guys that expected you to pay for them because you're a German, you have more money?
Let me think. Yeah. It would be more like, then for example, when you talk about, let's say, oh, let's go to the, I don't know, there's a concert at the place, at the bar. And so then he would be like, yeah, that sounds nice, but at the moment, I don't have so much money. So he wants you to say, okay, I'm going to invite you for cocktails or so. So he wouldn't say it directly. He wouldn't say, you have to pay. He would do it like indirectly. Yeah.
Something a little bit unrelated, but from my Cuban friends, I heard that when it comes to porn, it's not allowed in the country. And you're also not allowed to bring it into the country. Is that so true?
I think, there's the internet now, so people have access to that. So. And also, I remember now that you mentioned it, that in the pandemic, Cuban girls started to sell videos of themselves, like naked videos or masturbating or any kind of video, and started to sell them on WhatsApp, like on WhatsApp groups.
Wow. Interesting. Well, then you have to make money somehow, I guess.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, on your Instagram, you mentioned the 5 guys to know when you're in Cuba. This is not dating related, but tell me about those 5 guys.
Okay, let me get it together. The egg guy. So whenever I want to have eggs and there are no eggs on the store around my corner, I would call a guy who I think he has a farm, because he usually has eggs. I don't know where he gets them from, and I don't ask. And there's a guy for the cigars, very important. I have some guys who work at a cigar factory and always get my cigars because I'm a passionate smoker. And I also offer them to my clients sometimes when we do cigar and rum tastings, or friends in Germany. Very important. The money changing guy. Without that guy, you cannot do anything in Havana or like in Cuba.
Salsa dancer, I suppose. No,
better not. He only would get you in trouble. The water guy. I have a water guy who always brings me water because you cannot drink the tap water. So there is now small businesses who would boil the water and then filter it and bring it to your home. The potato guy. Because it's so hard to get potatoes in Cuba. Don't ask me why. I don't understand it. Also, it's only a seasonal vegetable.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, very frustrated, especially for Americans. I had American clients. They were like, I want to get French fries and a hamburger, and we were not in the season. I was like, that's not possible.
And it's so interesting. It's so interesting because I found Havana to be there's such a disparity because, you can go to one place and they have amazing ceviche with, I don't know what, like a French restaurant, an Italian restaurant. Like you have amazing food available. And then you realize that most people cannot afford that. And you have a Cuban place, next door, where you ask for a sandwich and they're missing half the ingredients. I remember going to get a sandwich with literally ham and cheese and they were missing the ham. And they said, can we just give you cheese? And I was like, I just saw a restaurant that had ceviche. You know what I mean? So it's interesting that you have such a disparity with like who can afford what. Obviously, one is more for the foreigners and one is more for the Cubans. And that I find that sad, because Like if I'm living in Cuba and I know that no one has access to this kind of stuff, okay, but some people definitely do, right? And it's just that you can't afford it with the convertible pesos. It's this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore, the convertible
Oh.
peso. Now we have other issues.
Oh.
Like they took them away, and we only have like the Cuban peso. But for some complicated things, this led to a really big inflation. So there's now an official course, like $1 can be 24 peso, or if you change on the street, can be like 300 peso and things like. Now it's so complicated in Cuba. And it's like not so much now divided between Cubans and foreigners. It's divided between people who have access to dollars or euros and therefore can change them on the black market. And so things are more affordable. And those who don't.
Yeah. Now, going back to relationships, do you see yourself dating someone from Cuba? Do you see yourself settling down to Cuba? Do you see that future, or are you still uncertain about that?
So, dating or settling, there are two issues. Dating a Cuban, I'm really picky now with Cubans, and I have, of course, witnessed so much thing like personally and with friends and so on. And actually, I'm quite now picky about really dating Cuban men because of all the problems that come with that, the economical problems and also the problems of leaving the country or like educational. There's so many differences. And settling in Cuba, it depends if the economic situation gets better or like if a foreigner living in Cuba now gets more rights. Everything depends. And in Cuba, things change so quickly. So I cannot really tell.
Now, being back in Germany right now, have you experienced any reverse culture shocks? Do you feel that you're feeling more comfortable in Germany, or are you missing Cuba and you want to go back?
So at the beginning, it was like quite shocking when I went to a restaurant and everything that was written on the menu was available, because in Cuba, I'm used to, we don't have this, we don't have that. Also, the prices that I saw are like the real prices, whereas in Cuba, you always have to convert them into what is it on the street market value, and then what is it then in euro, and you have to do like 3 calculations in order to get like a real price. What I miss, maybe the feeling, the atmosphere. It's more easy, it's more fun, it's more music, the sun. It's definitely more outgoing, more party, and more spontaneous. Oh, yeah, a lot more spontaneous than in Germany.
Have you considered maybe moving somewhere else in Latin America where you would still get the sun, the energy, but more of the comfort?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I have considered, or it's something I have to deal with like all the time, because in Cuba, there's so many challenges and frustrations. It's daily. You ask yourself the question, okay, where can I go where life is just a little bit easier? I don't know where yet. Maybe Mexico. I was so surprised of Mexico City when I was there in June. And I was like, wow, they are so modern. I'm not used to that of Latin America. But they have Uber Eats. Wow. And they even had things that I didn't know. And I felt like a Cuban coming from Cuba to like the real world, because of me living all the time in Cuba, working in Cuba, I'm so behind of the everything technical. And every time I'm outside of Cuba, I try to catch up as much as possible and learn this, do that, and this and that. Yeah. Always a bit stressful.
No, I agree. I mean, Havana has the positive side, which is that you have the sea there, like close to the city. Mexico City, you don't have that. But of course, Mexico City, for me, genuinely feels a part of it looks like it's European, and you have basically the same comforts, especially if you're in the nicer areas of the city. Like, it's beautiful, it's comfortable, the food scene is incredible, and It's quite expensive these days, but it's definitely,
Yeah.
I would say, way easier than living in Cuba and not having any access to
Uh-huh.
anything. And of course, I lived for 6 months of the year. I lived in Playa del Carmen, which is in Mexico.
Oh.
So I can totally relate to the Mexican thing. But and I do love Mexico. I mean, for many, many reasons. But yeah, I think a lot of us are missing this feeling. I think you talk a lot about atmosphere and energy, and a lot of times you can pinpoint why you feel so good in one place and why the
Uh-huh.
other place doesn't fit you as a person. You can have all the comforts in the world, you can have all the food in the world, but if you don't feel good in that place, if it doesn't resonate with your personality, you're not going to be your best self. I think this is my thing, and I think maybe Havana and Cuba, that fits with your personality somehow, right? And that's why you chose it.
Yeah, somehow that fits. But then the other thing, it's like it's so hard actually to make money or like to earn money in Cuba. Now I'm actually this week I'm posting on my Instagram something about jobs in Cuba, and it's really there are only a few jobs actually available, like especially for foreigners in order to make money. Or even in Cuba, I lived there now for more than 6 years, but I'm still astonished every time I talk to my Cuban friends. And for example, I have a lot of DJ friends, and everybody seems like to constantly work for free in Cuba. And I'm always amazed, like, how does everybody always work for free? And how does it actually work? And where does the money go to? Where does the money come from? Like, somehow there must be money. And I'm like, I still don't get it 100%. So.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
and that's the other problem. You could be in a really great place, but if you're not earning money and if there is no forward progress, then you start seeing the limitations of this country. And I think this is where you're at.
yeah.
Like, you like the atmosphere, but like,
Yeah, exactly.
what's the
But
future there?
exactly. I'm actually at the same point where a lot of Cubans are. So many Cubans in the generation between 20 and let's say 50 have left Cuba. Like almost all my friends have gone.
Interesting. And then do the people in Cuba, do they ask you like, what are you doing here? You're from Germany.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes, I of course understand it, but sometimes it just annoys me that I always have to justify, myself and this on a daily basis. And it's also hard to make a Cuban understand to say, yeah, I feel good here, because they're like, oh, what a bullshit. If I were a new country, I could go to the supermarket, I could buy milk, I could throw away my yogurt containers, They only see the other thing. But also, if you talk to Cubans who moved to Germany or whatever kind of country, they always say the same thing. If Cuba would be better, like if it was possible to make money in Cuba, they will come back anytime. Everybody is misses Cuba. Really, everybody.
That's such a wonderful point. I make a lot of content for, let's say, there's a lot of Brazilians and a lot of Europeans, and I'm always doing comparisons between. And a lot of times, Brazilians will move to another country and they'll say like, I miss the noise, I miss the singing, I just published a reel on Instagram where the girl talks about missing this energy, right? But when they're back in Brazil, again, it's not such a strong case as Cuba, because you have a lot of things available, but still there's crime, there's other problems, right? When they're in Brazil, they're missing, they cannot understand why someone would, why Europe would be a bad place to live, because like, hey, it's safe, like, what are you complaining about? It's only when you leave that country, you leave your country, then you're like, oh, I really didn't appreciate those things, like the more connection type things, where like I could go outside and I could sit with my neighbors and we could just talk. But here, I don't know my neighbors. I don't know anybody that lives in my building. And that's the thing that I never thought about that was available to me, because I was so worried about all the things that I was missing.
Yeah.
So I totally get that, being caught in between both worlds of wanting to have a little bit of everything. I mean, Cubans do move to Miami and they have both. I think in Miami, it's a good place for them.
Maybe. But also they get confronted with the reality, like you really have to hustle in Miami. Sometimes they have 2 or 3 jobs at a time, like just to pay bills, and they don't have a luxury lifestyle.
And you know what's interesting? I've talked to Cubans in Miami, and they say the Cubans changed for the worse in Miami, because all those like wonderful qualities of the simple life are gone. And it's all about like the ego. It's all about proving things. It's all about like the brand labels and all this stuff.
I have a Cuban friend. He now lives in France. He always said the worst Cubans are the Cubans from Miami because they're people with bad taste. Plus, they have the money to buy or like to live the bad taste. So you would see them like, also if you follow those influencers now on Instagram, horrible. Like everybody gets completely operated and only brands everywhere, the biggest cars. And then when they come to Cuba, they feel like the kings because they have so much more money than their relatives, their friends. And they show it. They always hire the biggest Mercedes rental car. They move only around in this, only stay in 5-star hotels. When they go to the club, they buy the biggest bottle, the most expensive bottles. And it just, they do like this. And then the Cubans in Cuba, they're like, wow, they made it, right? And then they see, and I'm like,
that's such a quality of poor countries, right? Because you've been striving your whole life to be like rich. And as soon as you get the money, you're going to put as much bling on yourself as humanly possible and think that's the way to go, And it's funny, like coming from Germany or, when we look at Scandinavia or the Netherlands, like those qualities are so cringe because people have enough money to never have that mindset. Yeah. That's super interesting. I have a funny story before we wrap up. Or actually, no, it's not a funny story. It's a real life story. I have my mom's friend's daughter went to Cuba to university, and there at a market, she met a guy who was selling eggs. And she decided this was a great idea for them to get into a relationship. They spent a ton of money to move him to Canada, and he came to Canada. They had a child together, and they started fighting a lot. And I actually feature them in my Singles Guide to Cuba, this couple. They basically had a child, and afterwards, like, things went wrong. And he didn't really want to work. He was buying a lot of brand labeled stuff, like shoes and watches and things like that, but he didn't really want to work. And so they decided to send him back to Cuba. They basically jumped to the airport and said, like, here's your ticket. You can go back to Cuba. And the guy escaped. He took an Uber and he just literally didn't go back to Cuba.
I love that story already.
And he stayed in Canada. I mean, the story doesn't go anywhere. He ended up like working in construction, but he never learned English. Like, he still doesn't speak English really well. At the end, though, he ran out of money, and I think he now went back to Cuba in the end. So kind of a sad story, but it was this big affair, so much money spent on it. And as you said, right, like a relationship with a Cuban is difficult because the amount of money you have to put into that relationship in order to sponsor this person to come wherever. And then even then, you're not guaranteed. Then you have to sponsor them your whole life. You're essentially paying for this person. I'm not sure how it works legally, but you're liable for them, right? So I think that's where she's at, that she's still kind of dealing with this, with this relationship, post-relationship.
Yeah, it's like you have it's like you care for a small child, because if you bring them at some point, you bring them to your home, like to your world, you have to teach them to use, I don't know, to buy a ticket at a metro station, because they don't have automates in Cuba. He doesn't know anything at all. It's like, it's a challenge, and you really have to know what you are confronting with. And I always tell this also to my clients, tourists, lady, you're gonna have a small child here about it. And I think a lot of people are not clear about it. Neither the foreign part nor the Cuban part, how hard this can be. But also, there are, of course, positive examples of Cubans who really managed to integrate completely. But also there are negative examples. Yeah, like, one of those there.
And I think, like, for women, a lot of times our attraction when we go to Cuba and we see someone in their element, oh, they know how to dance, oh, they speak Spanish, ooh, that's so sexy. But you take that fish out of the water and you put them in another water, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, he doesn't know anything. It's like, I have to teach him all these things. So it becomes kind of like you're the more assertive party and you're supposed to be now taking charge, and a lot of things fall apart, and then the cultural differences, and then the I mean, it's a lot to take on, for sure, especially if this person is moving to your country.
Like the salsa dance in Cuba, salsa dancer is perfect because you are in touch with tourism. Like anything that is in contact with tourism brings money in Cuba. So you are in contact with tourists who can make money, la la la. But when you're in Germany, salsa teacher, that's nothing. It's like a hobby or like a part-time job or like a side hustle, but it's never a full-time job. Or or let's say not a job that makes you enough money for the same standard of living that he would have in Cuba.
Yeah. I agree. I think people come to Cuba and, for this feeling, for this novelty, for this sex appeal, for this,
for the movement, Havana nights. Yeah.
It's what you're missing at that point in your life, but sometimes, it's not enough. And you've been in Cuba for 6 years, and now you're kind of a local, so you've seen both sides of it. That like first fresh-eyed look when you had that when you came to Cuba and everything was new and fresh, and now you're kind of like, I'm not sure what I want anymore. Alissa, last question for you. Like, we've talked a lot about this, but if you could sum it up, like, how did Cuba change you as a person after all these 6 years of living there?
I have gained a lot of more life experience, the good and the bad. I can definitely now survive with only a few things available. As a person, I don't have difficult. I still feel like the same person, but I know that I'm not, that I have changed.
Do you appreciate certain things more? Like you mentioned that the fact that, obviously you didn't have access to a lot of things. Like, do you appreciate things more now when you see that the grocery store has 20 different brand labels of whatever cereal? Like, do you feel like you appreciate that or not so much?
I appreciate it, but at the same time, sometimes I feel it's really not necessary. Sometimes I say it's not necessary to have like so much choices. Sometimes it is too much. But I don't want to complain about it because I know the other way. So actually, sometimes, especially in Germany, sometimes people tend, of course, everybody feels overwhelmed. Sometimes they're longing for like the more simple lifestyle is what you mentioned when you come to Cuba and you don't have that internet connection. People say to the Cuban, be glad about this. But actually, one should like appreciate what they have, because everybody from those poorer countries looks up to you and they want to have what you have. And you come from a country that managed to have all these things. I mean, these things didn't come like per se. Like in Germany, they started to evolve, and somebody fought for it. Society was evolving. To them, there was progress. A lot of people worked hard in order to have the standard where we are now. Our parents worked hard, but for us to have a house, in order to go to the university, I think, we should appreciate it more.
Yeah, we've never had such a high standard of life, and we've never complained this much, right? I think because maybe because like everyone around us kind of has the same standard of life. Like I'm living in Canada, everyone around me is fine, so I'm as good as everyone else. So maybe I don't notice it as much. You know what I mean? It's the same as like living, being like a celebrity, but everyone around you is a celebrity. So you're not going to care that you have millions of dollars because your friend has millions of dollars. So that point of comparison is gone. And, people, we want to be better in comparison to someone else. So maybe since the standard of life has gone up, we don't even think about it. We just take it as this is the normality, But it's not. It's not. Like living in Cuba, it's not.
Yeah, or like in Germany now, we have like a car. Like now having a car like is bad because of the pollution. And I get all that. And of course, and now the government is encouraging everybody to take a bike and so on. And I'm like, gosh, at least you have a car. You can buy a car. You can afford a car. Ask a Cuban if he prefers a car or a bike. I know the answer. So, we are already so high on our standards that now we go low. Yeah. This is something like really crazy that's happening now. Yeah.
It's very, very true. We're missing that simpleness of life, and the people that have the simple life are like, no, give me a little bit of what you have.
Exactly. I appreciate to have a car or like, I don't know, all the time internet access and yeah.
So, Alissa, on this note, I wanted to thank you for taking part in the podcast. Where can people find you?
Well, I have different channels, like mostly on Instagram. So I have my personal account where I tell everything about like my daily life in Cuba, the good things, the bad things, the struggles, and also give some tips for people who want to move to Cuba, somewhere else. Then if you want to have information about traveling to Cuba, it's Experiences by Alissa. I'm going to send you the links later. Because I do tours in Havana for tourists, like any kind of tours, like city tours, but also art. So we go to the artist house because I'm very connected with the artist community in Cuba. I do nightlife, only for girls, which is really good, especially for single traveling ladies. And also if people want to have like advice about trip planning or anything, Cuba, I help with that. And I'm very proud of my latest project. It's called Cubic Bag. With that project, I help Cuban designers or artists to sell their product outside of Cuba, because until now, that's not possible because Cubans, they don't have access to, let's say, like to the simplest things, let's say, international payment systems or so. And they just don't know how to do it, like to set up a business and I help with that. So people can purchase Cuban design. And yeah.
Nice. Okay, I'm gonna link to all of this on wherever you're watching or listening, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And you guys can go check out Alissa's projects, the few that she's working on. If you're interested in Cuba, please go check her out. Alissa, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.